started and kick things off. Welcome to today's webinar, which is focused on working with children in a telehealth context. I'm so excited for this content, and I know you all are as well. We have an hour dedicated to this webinar, so we'll spend about 45 minutes of roundtable discussion with our expert panelists, who I can't wait for you to meet. And then we've reserved 15 minutes on the back end for some Q&A. So as questions are coming up for you, please feel free to put those in the chat. And then at the end, we'll make sure we can get to as many as we can. A little bit about Path Mental Health, if you're not already familiar. So we are a mental health care organization that is driven by technology. So we have thousands of therapists across the nation. And our mission, which we reference every single day, is to make mental health care work for everyone, meaning it has to work certainly for those in need of care, our clients, but it also has to work for us as clinical providers in order to be effective. And so how do we do that? For those in need of care, we support essentially a matching process to help clients match directly with therapists who accept their insurance, specialize in their presenting problem, who are accepting new clients. And then we actually have some additional features that they can filter searches by. And the ultimate goal is to really establish a strong client-therapist fit, right? So care can be most successful. And then for those providing care, for the therapist, we're essentially a practice in a box. So we support with everything admin related. We take care of the billing, the credentialing, the EHR, marketing, verification of client benefits, all of the sides of private practice that can take a lot of work and time away from you all. So essentially, we just want to make sure our therapists can focus on what they do best, which is providing care and not as much time dealing with the admin side of things. So, and then lastly, a little bit about me, just as the host for today's panel webinar. My name is Ann Jackson. I'm a licensed therapist in Colorado. I've been practicing for about 14 years, primarily in community mental health and inpatient settings, but with some telehealth work in there as well. And at Path, I'm a clinical quality coach. So I support our providers in all things related to clinical practice and clinical documentation. So I will now have our panelists take a few minutes just to introduce themselves, share a little bit about their professional background, and then we will launch into our content for today. So why don't, to kick us off, let's start with Kelly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Zander. I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I am working in private practice, part of a group, the Process Wellness Collective. I am also the director of community, and I work with kids, teens, and young adults. I see people virtually and in person, and we are based in Orange County, California. So excited to see everybody and have everyone's questions.
Christine, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Mark-Griffin. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I am based in San Francisco. However, provide virtual and in person to all clients in California. I specialize in children and women, specifically maternal mental health. So all those expecting and new mamas. I also have a specialty in EMDR with children. So I'm an EMDR consultant, a credit provider, and actually this year a new author. So just authored a book on EMDR in kids. So that's a little bit about me. My practice is a small group practice called Spark All Wellness.
Thanks, Christine. Junie?
Hello, everyone. My name is Junie. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm the founder of Rose Junie Therapy, a small group practice, and we have offices in Long Beach and Echo Park in Los Angeles. We follow the W-2 employment model for our licensed employees and associates, and we take pride in being a woman of color group practice that renders therapeutic services in our native language. We also have telehealth in person and provide concierge services all over California. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel. I originally, became interested in working with children from a systems point of view. I truly believe in intervening at an early age and really identifying a child's needs and a systems, how they're functioning in the family and how they experience, conflicts that may arise. And kids can be so fun and energetic, and they're so darn honest. And that's why I truly love working with them. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you all for those introductions. As you can see, we are in great hands today, everybody, and I'm so excited to kind of comb through some questions and get some insight and maybe even some tips and tools, things we can all take today from this webinar and maybe go put into practice with our clients. So to get things started, I think some therapists are actually hesitant to provide therapy via telehealth to children and adolescents. And I'm curious from you all, could you speak to why, one, you think that may be, where that hesitancy comes from, and maybe even how you've overcome some of those challenges in your own practice doing telehealth with children and adolescents?
I can jumpstart us. I think it's a really tender topic, and I think it really just depends, because children, especially the younger the child, can be super vulnerable. And it's not like a child can decide, well, I'm going to drive myself into therapy if mom and dad won't take me or my caregiver won't take me. So I think there's a lot of hesitancy, and there's lots of considerations that can be made, right? Whether there's, coming from a child welfare background, I was a child welfare worker for the first 5 years of my career, and then I shifted into community health for the other half of my career before jumping into private practice. And working with families that have complex trauma, that maybe have open court cases, that maybe have active trauma going on. Maybe the parents are a part of that active trauma. I think there's a lot of considerations to have, but it's possible. It's possible we can find that balance. I think it does take some extra mindfulness and work and thought into accepting the right clients and having the right fit, and also having the right precautions to make sure that at the end of the day, the child is safe physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We can all hold that together in our practice. That's what we all do, right? We're all looking at confidentiality and when we have to break confidentiality.
I second that. Same, Christine, coming from community mental health and transitioning to private practice. I think, the biggest aspect or the challenge is being comfortable in the telehealth arena and trying to navigate and having a buy-in and having a sense of understanding from the caregivers of what telehealth can look like for little ones, especially when you do service young kids under the age of 5, and how does that look like? And what I have found is that there's a lot of positives that come from doing telehealth. Is you get to see their environment, you get to see where they're most comfortable at in their own space, and you get to see how they live their lives, and you get a snapshot of it. And as you become comfortable to that, or as I became, and our licensed employees and our associates, is once we're comfortable, our kiddos become comfortable, our caregivers become comfortable, and we can ease into the telehealth arena. Yeah.
I think some of the hesitation also comes in to the logistical side, right? Like, do we have a laptop? Do we have video access? Do we have all of these capabilities? As well as, are they in a private session? And if you are not with them in person and the parents aren't with them, but they're 5, how are they being monitored? What can you really do? There are some barriers that are completely valid. And again, we have learned to adjust with that. I think a lot because of COVID, we didn't really have the option so often to be able to say like, no, come on in, it's fine. I was a trainee during the very beginning of COVID, so we were learning and on top of learning. So a lot of the concerns that parents bring in, you're able to work through. And I think similar to the way that a lot of us tailor our sessions with our clients, you tailor that experience to the client's family, the client's needs. while also keeping in mind things like confidentiality, safety, and, what your role really is as well.
Yeah, thank you all. Those are excellent answers. And as you know, as you were sharing, I was thinking about, when the pandemic began, how many of us as providers, I know a lot of my colleagues would say, like, I didn't sign up to be a telehealth therapist. I got into this work to do in-person care. I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. And yet here we are 3 years later, some of us exclusively providing care via telehealth. And so if I'm hearing you, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity there for us to kind of, even if you're hesitant or you're not sure if you could possess these skills, that, it is possible to develop them and incorporate them into your practice.
Nice. And if I can add to that, Anne, I think, the shift in moving away from being in that pandemic mindset where it's really polarized, like I'm either in person or I'm virtual. I actually work from a hybrid approach. I have young kids myself, or, I see a lot of the panelists like nodding their head. If I have a small like cold or something and it's not COVID, hey, let's make this a hybrid approach. Would you be comfortable wearing a mask? I'm going to wear a mask because I have a little cold, but I'm not, not too sick to not be in person, or my allergies are horrible right now in California. And it gives flexibility for parents and caregivers and the children. Like, I have children and teens who may not have participated in after school sports, but because virtual is available during the sports season, like, hey, they're starting soccer, or they're starting softball, or they're starting baseball. Can we switch to a Wednesday, or can we do every other week in person and then every other week virtual, so that they can get to their practice and still be part of their team and do kid stuff essentially still? It kind of gives more room for that versus, oh, well, you can't do that activity, or you can't go hang out with your friend. You can't go to that birthday party because we have your therapy session today.
I second that. The hybrid model, the flexibility of telehealth is truly beautiful. From the group practice, we're able to meet our clients' needs at any given time. And PCIT, parent-child interactive therapy, is so beautiful in a telehealth world, because you're able to engage with parents, you're able to engage with the child all together. And that hybrid model really brings forward a different foundation and a different way in servicing, our little ones and our parents. So I like doing the hybrid model, and we all do, especially when our kids are busy and holidays are coming up, spring break. We just ended spring break. So yeah, it's really convenient for our clients.
Yeah, almost naming that we might have hesitancy about providing, telehealth, but maybe families have some degree of hesitancy related to their children engaging via telehealth, if they can only, benefit from in-person care. So there may be some opportunity there as well. Thank you so much for that. I think that's super helpful, kind of food for thought. Let's talk about now how parents and caregivers come into play when working with kids and teletherapy. So more specifically, maybe how do you engage with parents and caregivers? How do you manage the dynamic between, balancing parents' expectation for therapy versus maybe how the child's presenting? What's coming up in regards to that?
I can start in this topic. In our group practice, we really take our time building rapport with our caregivers, identifying what it is that's happening with our little ones, and establishing a connection with the parent or caregiver is really crucial for us, because throughout the child's treatment, we're collaborative. We make sure that we have collaborative sessions with the caregivers, and the most important part is understanding from their point of view what it is that's happening, and having them lead the treatment, right? Because we only get a snippet of 50 minutes once a week, and they're the experts. They're the ones in the environment. So that connection, the collaboration from the very beginning and throughout treatment is really what's going to allow us to meet the needs of our little ones. And in collaboration, we do a lot of play therapy. We engage with our caregivers, dyadic sessions. And so the caregivers are also aware of what we're doing with our little ones, and they're much more trusting. They know what our goals are. So that comes into the very beginning of establishing that rapport and establishing that buy-in, which is really crucial when we are working with kids.
I agree with that. The collaborative part and aspect of having them engage in sessions, I think, is really amplified when it's virtual, because a lot of the times they'll have to be there to set it up, or they are more accessible because they're there. When you're in person, you know, it's not terrible if we're away from the parent, but it just kind of requires a different type of engagement from the parent. And I think a lot of us have seen where a lot of parents will drop their kid off and then they'll come pick them up, and you're like, okay, like, have fun at therapy or do the therapy thing, and I'm not a part of this and it's yours, which we love to see the safety, right? And we honor that. But I think it also sometimes can be a little dismissive, where it's like the parents like, oh, this is just them, this is their experience. And when you're working with kids, you have to involve the family system most of the time. So I think it kind of pulls parents in a little bit, or caretakers, to engage a little further virtually.
Yeah, I think I echo everything that Kelly and Rose shared. And really, I use this metaphor and analogy with my parents when they come in, especially those parents who think, well, you just fix my child and I have to do nothing. I share with them we're all connected. I work with, new moms as well, and in the baby world. And so I use the analogy of the baby mobile. If you touch one part, the rest of it moves. And so if one individual in the family is having a problem or having an issue, it shifts everybody in the family, right? It's not just the child is dealing with this anxiety, the parents and the siblings and everybody else, the teachers, the peers, they all have this connection and feel that struggle, right? So the village and having that team and that network of support and having parents on board. Of course, I think it's important to assess parents' willingness and readiness to participate, right? Because if parents haven't done their own healing and their own work, and they're going to be more destructive, or maybe or it's just not going to work to have conjoint and dyad and do all the beautiful PCIT, all that stuff, you have to make that clinical judgment and assessment for yourself of how much parent consultation or parent individual work do I need to do before they're ready. And maybe sometimes it's with the child. Maybe there's been a rupture in the relationship and there's some attachment trauma between the caregiver and the child. And I need to work with the child individually a little bit more to build up that safety before I can bring the parent in. So all those considerations, all those things, eventually most of my families and parents that work with me, we have a check-in of some sort, whether parents come in and do it in front of the child, with the child, or they come in at the end of the session, or I do it individually, separately. But again, I'm making that judgment call, and I'm meeting the clients where they're at, meeting their needs, and just taking all those considerations into mind.
That's fantastic. As you're all sharing and talking about those circumstances in which we're trying to elicit more engagement from parents, what happens when the pendulum swings the other way and maybe you're working in a telehealth context? I know we've had providers share examples where there is a parent who tends to want to be a part of every single session and want to kind of answer questions on behalf of the client, interjects, story tells. Can you share any tips for how to navigate that when it's coming from a good engaged place, but it's actually potentially going to hinder clinical work being done? How could you potentially address that?
I really truly enjoy having an engaged parent, whereas the other one, the latter is a not engaged parent, right? Usually from my experience working with caregivers is that they want to be heard. They want you to understand that what they're going through is important, right? And they want to feel validated. And so I give them the space. As a director of my practice, I step in with my clinicians when there is needed time for me to speak to the caregiver of whatever it is that they're experiencing. And then also provide a little bit of psychoeducation and what the treatment goal and the treatment planning and what that looks like between the child and the therapist. But it does take that time, right? Of I understand you, I hear you, and this experience is important. But let's try to figure out collaboratively how the kiddo can speak on their own with support, right? But still provide that open space for them. Because most parents, sometimes they feel that a child's behavior is just this isolated event and that not other kids or families experience this. And when we validate that, I hear you, I see you, that kind of, lessens their anxiety. So taking that time and really giving that psychoeducation is helpful.
That's fantastic. Any other thoughts on that?
I think that is a beautiful way to allow the parents to be heard, because if you engage with inner child work, their inner child is also showing up being like, I want to be heard too. I want to be seen too. And I think another angle you can take as well is like, wow, I really do see that this is impacting you and that you care a lot. And it could be not all the time, but sometimes an avenue for you to kind of say like, are you being supported? Are you, is there a space that you have to kind of discuss these things in greater depth for yourself? And that could be beneficial to your child. And it's not to distance the parent or caretaker from the session, but it reminds them a little bit that this is for, the child. And we want to give them their space too and their time. And I think when you kind of are, again, a little more malleable, you play what you need for that session. It allows you to be what that family is looking for in that moment versus kind of more rigid and saying like, this is how I do things and whatnot. Because we're working with people and people react and respond and have their own things and needs that are coming up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And then the last question we had said, and I see all these really fantastic questions popping up in the chat, so I'm so excited. I think we're going to have a lot of time to work our way through some of those. But another kind of core question is, how do you create engaging sessions via telehealth? How do you make it fun? I think, we kicked things off talking a little bit about that hesitancy. And just in my conversations with colleagues, I think a lot of it is really rooted in that. Almost like, well, if we were in person, I would have my sand tray and I would have, games and I would have this, but like, how am I going to do this with a 9-year-old via Zoom? So we'd love to hear about any tools, tricks, modalities that you have found really effective in your practice that maybe we could like put in our back pocket and then pull out and try out with some of our clients.
Yeah, I can start off with this one. Before we started this webinar, I updated my Zoom and was playing around with the Zoom filters. And, I think kids just want to have fun. They want to come in and they want to laugh. they want to play. They don't want to talk all the time. So there's different ways that you can engage kids. I'm just playing around with some of these. If you haven't explored, you can, they just did an avatar one. And so I can turn into a character and I don't have to be myself. And this is less threatening, right? This is more interactive and fun and playful. There's so many ways just using some of the filters on Zoom that you can engage with kids and make it fun. Like who's going to take me seriously with a pizza on my head? So when we're with kids, there's all sorts of fun activities. There is virtual sand trays. There are free virtual sand trays. There are online games that you can engage them in. I know the other panelists and I were talking about Minecraft and Roblox and making accounts for that so you can join the child in their world. I mean, these are essentially like an imaginary world. If they were in my office, you see the dollhouse behind me, they're building their own dollhouse in Roblox and in Minecraft, and they're building up their own protectors and their own walls, and they have dragons to fight off the bad guys. What else? I mean, you can also go the old school route and send them a care package. So many kids get so excited getting that. I get excited getting an Amazon package. So if I open a box and it's Play-Doh and bubbles and coloring and art and, something to make, arts and crafts to make a stress ball or something, it's like a fun package that you could send. It could be very minimal too. It doesn't have to be this big gift basket. It could be, just a big envelope with some worksheets and coloring pages. You can share your Zoom screen, you can share a worksheet, be interactive with some of the tools. Google has lots of tools. There could be an entire training, like an 8-hour training on different tools and things for kids. I think if you find them, they are there. I think it's just our part is doing a little work. It's a more prep work. It is. You have to put more prep work into the virtual sessions. I would say you can also use what the children have, what the kids have. Some family homes, some kids have way better playrooms than I have. They're going into their playroom, pulling out their Jenga, pulling out their dolls, pulling out their Legos. And I can use that to my advantage. I can have their session be in their playroom and make some agreements and talk to the parents. If the child has siblings, let's make sure that for this 15 minutes, the child has access to the playroom on their own and that they have some privacy, and the siblings go outside and play. Make sure that you're in the kitchen so you're nearby so you can intervene and come in if you need to support. I mean, again, more work, right? You have to communicate that to the parents and caregivers. You have to set that up. You have to make that plan. But those tools are absolutely there, and we could be so creative with it.
I think it's also a great way to, if you are trying to bring the parent in, you preemptively communicate with them, like, could you have these things prepared? Do you have access to these things? And then I've made sensory bins and things, from virtual sessions, and the parents are there building it with them. And it's also creating safety for the child. And they're both on the same page of what this is about, what this is for, what this does, how to use it. So, when you have the caretaker and the child together, it can be a tool that you can implement when it comes to crafts and things as well.
Yeah, when COVID hit and we were forced to do telehealth, right? One thing that remained constant in just managing the staff in our group practice is engagement. If I'm not engaged in session, no one will be engaged on the other side, right? So the preparation of telehealth it takes, 5 to 10 minutes prior to starting, right? Closing all the windows, our notes, making sure that our computers are on do not disturb, right? And making sure that platform, we're setting ourselves up to fully be engaged with our little ones or the person on the other side of the screen. And I truly believe in the power of body movement. So our therapist, myself, we do virtual dance parties. If we have built a rapport, we're moving, we are dancing, you know what I mean? So you can be as creative as you can. And it goes back to the power of play and how comfortable you are in your own, in your own skin, and coming down and really understanding what your child is wanting from that space and being a kid. I think that's what it is having fun with your little one on that screen and building that rapport in in a way that makes them feel seen. So that's really what it is preparing, making sure that you have that, all those windows are closed and you're engaged, and being, looking at other modalities like, you could do CBT via, art therapy. You can be so creative in telehealth as much as you can be in in-person sessions.
Wow, so many good ideas, so many things I want to go and try. And as we're sharing ideas, I'm curious, even with the best laid plans, right? We can enter a space and have this idea that we think is really going to land well. And this is with adult clients as well. And then it just doesn't connect, or it doesn't really go the way we thought it. I'm curious if any of you have an example that you could reflect on, or maybe just a general strategy of what happens when we say, hey, we're going to, we're going to do this coping box, or we're going to do this activity, and it just doesn't seem to connect the way we hoped it would. What do we do? Do we keep trying that same thing? Do we try something different? Do we just need to give it more time and maybe give ourselves some grace and space to find what fits? Or any kind of thoughts or experiences you could share on that?
Oh, yes. And, I think this isn't a new thing. It would happen in person as well. Pre-pandemic, you have all these beautiful things. Well, I think we're going to do this beautiful therapeutic activity that I spent all day prepping. We're going to do a hot cocoa challenge because it's, warm and fuzzy in Christmas time, and they come in and they want to make slime. So I think it happens. And I think, again, it goes back to that planning, like have a couple extra things in mind. And sometimes we just have to go on the whim. And I'm going to just pull this up because one of my kids loves lemurs and zoo animals. So all she wanted to do was find backgrounds that she could blend into. I don't know if this is popping up. Am I freezing? Yeah, so she wanted to just, she's like, I'm just gonna be a lemur. And she just wanted to play and do that. But honestly, that brought up so much of like how she wanted to hide things, how she wanted to blend in, how she just wanted to fit in, right? Sometimes you think that what they're bringing to the table, even via telehealth, might not be like, are they just being off task, whatnot? No, they know they need to work on. They bring it, and there's creative ways that you can make a fun activity that a child finds. And so we just spent the entire time, and we still every day we just spent a couple of minutes finding backgrounds that we can blend into and pretend like we're something. And she just like loves like being able to like, oh, wow, my sweater matches. Like I'm a peacock today, right? And being able to just be playful and find these backgrounds. And it's not that hard to go to Google, download a Google image, make it your virtual background, and just be interactive and fun with the kids, and just take what your client gives you and run with it.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you. It's like it's great to have, like we talked about, the preparation and the plan in place, and that inherently just holding space and creating this safe therapeutic space can be extremely powerful, even if we don't have, the perfect game or the perfect thing, that's okay, that we can kind of roll with it. And yeah. Any other thoughts from Kelly or Junie on that?
Yeah, it just reminds me back to when I first received a kiddo, in-person kiddo, and I felt so stiff, right? I was licensed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a kid. There's 3. What do I do? And I wasn't flexible. I was nervous, right? And our kids still do feel that in a telehealth context. And Christine said it, flexibility, being able to be silly and meet them where they're at, thinking outside of the box, have them lead the play, right? If they want to be a lemur, they could be a lemur with them. So I think when we take off that like expert role, right, and we become human and we connect, kids feel that and they thrive on that. So being flexible, really, and sometimes you have to take off that hat, right, and play. And in telehealth, that is so powerful, to play, the playing part and being silly. So yeah.
I think those are all really great ideas and points too. And another part is like, you're in their space if you're virtually there, right? You're not in a session in person. And so that's very vulnerable. As adults, we might feel that way. As kids, they might be excited to show you their favorite toy, or show you their bedding or something, like outside their window if they have a window in their room, right? And so if they're feeling distracted and you're feeling resistant, you're not going to get anywhere. Like both of the other panelists said, you have to be flexible. And the same way you'd be flexible in person, but almost a little bit in a different way, where you have to really engage on their side and kind of leave your world behind and just pretend like you're in theirs with them, right? Show me this. What's your favorite, blah, blah, blah. Things like that. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much. Those are just so helpful and insightful responses, and hopefully generate a lot of ideas for our participants. We got through our core questions pretty quick, but I'm excited because I know there was a lot of questions in the chat. So I'm actually going to pass the mic to Ellie, and she'll just share some questions that have come up from our participants, and we'll just navigate our way through them.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you all to all of our wonderful panelists and our attendees for posing these great questions. I'll run through some of the questions that popped up in the chat, and we can talk through them. So the first one is regarding confidentiality. What are some signs that indicate that a child is not comfortable because their caregiver is near in a telehealth environment, or that they're concerned that they're being overheard, and how do you address that?
Yes, that happens. And, you know, Zoom has a chat feature and they can control the volume on their laptop, or you can just lean in and whisper. You could just whisper. Do you want to whisper to me something that you don't want mom and dad to hear? Yeah, okay. Or do you want to type it? Okay, I'll pull the chat so I can read it. All right, do you want me to play music while you type that up? There's so many, I think, different strategies. I used to be a school-based therapist, and the therapy office was right next to the principal's office. And I even did this in person inside, because they didn't want the principal hearing, or other kids who were in the principal's office hearing their business. And so we would, you know, they had their Google Chromebooks. That's another thing that you could use if the child has like a Google email for school. You can just do like a Google Doc, and that's what you type in. And then when it's done, you delete it all, and the session is done, it disappears, and it's nowhere to be found. But it's an interactive, and they can put the Google Doc and you can share screen with the Zoom. So I've done that as well. I think there's ways that you can be a little like sneaky with the confidentiality and create that space. I think that's the other the positive thing about a hybrid model, just kind of knowing, like in my office, it's soundproof, it's, you know, confidential. Mom and dad dropped you off and went grocery shopping, so they're nowhere near. So they really, that's an opportunity to check in, like, how safe is it really at home, if you have that ability and capability to do that. But I think there's ways to work around it and really ask if parent is really hovering and maybe over involved.
Yeah, that's like nonverbal cues, right? There's a shift in their tone, or there's a shutting down, and really paying close attention to that, and asking those direct questions in the most creative way possible. We do a lot of art therapy, we do a lot of drawing. So sometimes our kids would be like, mom's around, or dad's around, or someone's around, right? And then we just kind of draw what we're feeling. So assessing for that and those nonverbal cues, and looking for signs of distress. In community mental health, when I used to work there, you know, there were clients, there were kiddos that were involved in child protective services. So we had to be flexible, right? And when working with kids, they can't necessarily leave their rooms, but they have backyards. You can go take a breath outside, do mindfulness outside, or leave their room and be somewhere else in a different environment and assess for risk. I think it's really important to be flexible and engage with our kiddo, or engage with the kid that when they feel safe, right? And sometimes it involves us moving to a different direction, moving outside, or moving away from their current environment. So yeah.
Those are all really great solutions, right? And I think in the moment, it can feel like there's a little resistance at times, right? You're like, they don't want to talk. Or I have kids and teens that'll do this, where they're like, fine, today was fine. And you're just like, oh, can you pull your screen down? They'll be like, no. And so then, you know, sometimes I'll go into the chat and be like, okay, like, can you share a little bit about why you can't pull your screen down? And they'll type and they'll be like, I don't want to talk about it. So-and-so is here, right? Or things like that. And so you notice that resistance. And so I think it brings back that quality of being flexible as a therapist, where you try to remind yourself that what you're perceiving might not be the actual case, right? And if you're not in person, you can't see the fidgeting or the feet tapping and all of that. And so you can ask them questions like, where do you feel it in your body, right? Those somatic responses. And does that question, make you nervous, or things like that, where it's not that you're prying, but you are trying to pull from different areas instead of being as direct, and then kind of allowing those sneaky features to come in and bridge that gap for you. Because ultimately, if they don't feel like they can talk about what it is they'd like to talk about with someone in the room, they don't feel like they can talk about it with you. And it's not a reflection of you as a therapist, it's just the circumstances, the situation that you're in. So remind yourself that too.
Can I just add, I love this, Kelly, because I have two groups of people who do this, and it's either my resistant teens or it's my grandparents that don't really know how to use technology. The other, something else, a tip and trick for confidentiality and all that stuff is having a code word or a code sign, right? Some of my kids, it's just like, I don't want my brother to hear. It's not even my parents. It's like, I don't want, my brother is over there. And the word for brother is over there is like falafel. And they just say, we just make up a word and it's fun, right? And so we have our own language and we have our own, we use their own words. Maybe they have like a little or a little like sign that they do with their hands. That's just like a code for, hold on a second, telehealth therapist, my mom is listening, right? Or my brother is trying to hear all my secrets and I don't want him to share who my crush is tomorrow at school. I think it could be at any level of like things that are just kept confidential within our therapy session. Let's make a little code word or a code sign when you're at home and you're not in my office, so I know, pause or wait or talk about something different while this, and then we have a code for like, okay, we're in the clear, it's good. And then we could resume our therapy session.
I love those. And I love, Christine and Kelly, you're also both really tapping into this idea of resistance. So a lot of times therapists will say, I'm not sure this kid's appropriate for telehealth. They don't really engage. They're kind of resistant to therapy. But I feel like what you're describing and naming is like, is it this willful resistant, or is it that like they don't really have the skills to communicate about emotions? Or right, there could be a lot of things to discover as to why it feels like you're pulling teeth just to get through the session. And so there's a lot of things that sounds like we can do as providers to navigate that, as opposed to just saying, I don't think this kid, I don't think I can see them via telehealth. Maybe there's some work to be done to support them.
Thank you all. This next question is a great one that is applicable in both the telehealth and in-person settings. How do you handle it if a child's goals might be different from that of their caregivers?
I'm going to answer that. They usually are. So they usually are, right? And it's the collaboration, and understanding what our little ones, our kids' goals are, and communicating that to their caregivers if appropriate, right? And collaborating with the caregiver and really having, from their standpoint, from the kid's standpoint, developmentally, why is that goal important to them? And allowing them to reach that goal. But usually it is quite different. It's not behavioral, when you're talking to a 6, 7, 8-year-old, it's not like, I want to change my behavior for this. It's not that, so collaboration, validating our kiddos and their goals, and then having parents understand that perhaps it may be different, or perhaps it may be the same thing, but it's coming out in different language, right? So bridging that gap and coming through together as the provider is where we usually go first, is the collaboration part. Yeah.
I agree on all of those, and that would be the same answer that I have.
Yeah, I think that's the work, and Rose hit the nail on the head, is that most of the time it sounds like different goals, but really it's a core goal set in different languages. If the problem is angry outbursts, parents' goal is child stops hitting, child's goal is I have friends. It's the same core thing, right? It's still, so we work on the anger so that it's easier to connect with peers and have friendships, and you're not hitting your parents and teachers and siblings, right? It's like the same goal set in different ways from different perspectives. And I think that's our job as wearing multiple hats, being able to empathize with multiple perspectives from the caregivers, from the child. And again, work collaboratively with the family to reach their common core goal.
Fantastic. Thank you all. And our last question, and I will say if any of our attendees do have additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat now so we can make sure that we get to them. But the last question that we have on the list of what was dropped in the chat is, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but how do you assess risk for kids in a telehealth setting?
Yeah, we touched base on this. In community mental health, more so, right? When there is safety involved in most of the clients or the kids we had in our clinic, observing nonverbal cues, right? Yes, we see just a little amount of screen time, like screen space, but observing their nonverbal cues, paying close attention to facial expressions, body language, tone, right? You can usually, if you know your kiddo and you've worked with them for a while, you can see by their body language and tone of voice, you can get an idea of what's happening, right? And you can get signs of distress and discomfort and potential risks. And that's the beautiful thing about hybrid, right? Is if there is a concern or there is something coming up, you can offer, why don't we come in? Or display it as such as, I think it'll be real important for us to do this activity in person. But those nonverbal cues usually for children are prominent. And when you're seeing their faces and it shifts and it's just not the normal, you start asking these direct questions, right? Child's thoughts and seeing where their environment is at and go from there. And then I check for everything, right? What are they wearing? What did they have for breakfast? And the CPS mind comes up, you know what I mean? What did they do today? What did they have for food last night? Do they have a snack? So I start kind of checking that off. And then if there's suicidal ideations, you know what I mean? We explore what's going on. We engage with them in a flexible way and go from there.
Yeah. And I will add, the extra precaution of being on telehealth, and now it's mandated once we have to take the virtual telehealth training. You're making sure you have all the logistics before you start virtual. You make sure the location of the client, right? Their emergency contact, that you've had that conversation already and you review it and you repeat it, like, especially if it's with adults and teens. With the child, you'll have to work, obviously you would have the contact number of the parents, making sure, like, how close are the parents? Are they at work and it's like an hour away? Or are they in the other room? Or are they just down the street at the grocery store? So kind of knowing the location. With an adult, you just have to know about the adult. With the child, you really do have to know, well, where are the caregivers when you're in your telehealth session in the event that you need support? And are there additional support people, or is this at school, or does the child have a grandma or grandparent or aunt and uncle that can be emergency contacts if something goes south and I can't reach mom and dad because their phone is on work mode or sleep mode? Who knows? And so just making sure you have all those things, and you can just, at the end of the day, if you need to, call 911. I mean, that's just we just need to do what we need to do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this response is very multifaceted, right? All of these are such important things to pay attention to prepare for, because the reality is also kids don't always know when they're in danger, right? It's very normalized, especially in their home environment. And they're like, oh, well, this always happens. And, you don't want to instill fear as a response, you know, when you're working with them either. And so I think part of it is absolutely the preparation, the mandatory reporting requirements and all of those things. And then the other part is being able to be flexible again, right? And like think on your feet of like, okay, don't scare this child for something that's in their environment right now. How can we move through this? What am I required to do? And you have to be malleable to the situation. But similarly, like the question I think was assessing, you know, for safety and the same things that you would do in person. There are limitations. Again, you can't see their hands, you can't see what's going on, and you have such a small screen, like you said. But at the same time, you don't want to scare them as your response as well.
Thank you all for those very thoughtful responses. We did get one more question in the chat, so this will be our last question. How do you define progress, and what have you found to be the best measures?
I like taking this one. But I think it's progress is I'm always asking the parents, caregivers again, and the child frequency and intensity. I have parents after the child and they have done such amazing, wonderful work. And it's like, well, the child's still having outbursts and the child, well, they're not fixed yet. And it's when I actually peel it back and look at it through a different lens and ask them more questions, it's like, well, they went from tantruming 8 times a day for like an hour each time to twice a week. Yes, the tantrums are still there. And sometimes when you're in it and you're experiencing it, it's hard to pull back, right? It's hard to see the bigger picture. And so I think just helping caregivers, parents, and even the child themselves pull back when they feel like they haven't made progress, or just assessing the progress. Maybe it gets worse. Sometimes in therapy, things do get worse before they get better. And so assessing that, like, let's not pull out, let's just keep trying this intervention consistently for this chunk of time before we try something else. I think we are in a culture of instant gratification where they just want it now, fix it overnight. Why isn't it all better? And it's, well, because I can't fix 12 years of trauma in 2 sessions, right? And so I think those conversations that are just authentic and just staying true to, you know, what's realistic and what's unrealistic, and helping the child and the caregivers highlight the wins. Like, wow, look at all this progress. You've really made a lot.
Yeah, I like that. It's we at the group practice have a mandatory every 3 to 5 weeks to check in with the parents that, are like, okay, I want you to see my 12-year-old or 13-year-old. And we have that collaborative care, and we really kind of, examine the progress and the achievements, even though they're tiny in their eyes. That's progress, right? Celebrating the small wins, and allowing them to see what we're seeing in session. And you can pull from that, from what they're observing as well at home. They're like, oh my gosh, yeah, Johnny did this. They were able to go from one activity to the next without a rupture. So highlighting what we're seeing in session and seeing if the caregivers can see that as well. But just overall, just checking in with the caregivers, allowing them to see that there are some small changes, and those big changes will take time, right? Looking at increases in coping skills, improvements in their symptoms, right? So sometimes, as what Christine says, when they're in it, they can't really see out of it. And it's our job and our goal is for them to see the full picture.
I think another part too is when you are stepping in to work with a new family, creating those realistic expectations, like everyone said, but checking in also and allowing the child to assess themselves. I think it also is a beautiful reminder for them to be self-aware and to notice what's changing and what's going on. And that's part of the work that we all do in general, and bringing the parents in and having that bridged moment where you get to have everybody in and allow them to everyone to acknowledge the development and the changes and all of that based off of the initial session of what are your expectations for therapy, right? Are they realistic? And timeline wise, what could that look like?
Thank you all for your thoughtful answers to our attendee questions. I will turn it over back to Anne to close out the conversation.
Yeah, I just want to echo Ellie. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom, your experiences, certainly giving us lots of ideas and things to try out. I think anytime we attend a webinar, any type of presentation, insight's great, but action is even better. If we feel like we left with something tangible that we can put into play, and gosh, there was so many great ideas generated. So truly, thank you all so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was fun. I was anxious in the very beginning, but I'm like, you know what? I love working with kids. Christine, Kelly, thank you for being a part of this panel. And thank you for, Anne and supporting us, and Ellie. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me. I also feel like I walked away with some new knowledge and new
There you go.
I'm excited to implement that myself. And it's just great to be a community with everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be here and connect with you all.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Take care.